Hello Team 613. I want to give you a quick introduction to Java. Java is a language for writing computer programs. At its core, a computer program is a set of instructions for creating data and for manipulating data that's stored in memory. Now, I'm going to show you three different types or three different examples of data being created and stored and three different ways that we can manipulate this data. And then I want to show you a variety of I want to show you where you can get more information about different methods to manipulate data that we use in our program. So let's get started. Here's NetBeans right here. I've gone ahead and I have right here, if we look in our code, here's the first, second, and third example of creating data, storing it, and manipulating it. So our first type of data is going to be just a basic number, 3 and 4. We're saving it to a variable that's named A here and B here. Sometimes this is called the handle for our data because it's what allows us to pick up and manipulate the data that we've stored. And then int is short for integer. It just tells the computer program that we're going to be storing an integer inside a variable A. Okay, so it basically it tells the computer hardware how much space to save on the hard drive to store this data, how much memory will be needed. So in this case, we've got A, we've got B. I've set up another variable C, but we haven't stored any information inside of it. And then I'm manipulating the information stored in C by saying that it's going to be equal to A plus B. So inside of C, after this line is executed, it's going to be 7. So we found a way to store some data. I've shown you how to set up space on the hard drive for it and how to insert a value into that space, and then also how to name that space so we can use it later on in the program, and then we can manipulate it somehow. Now, our second example here is going to be a slightly different type of data that we're going to store called a string. A string is just a series of characters that are one after the other. For example, a sentence I've written right here, hello team 613, is an example of a string. And to show that I've got a string, I put Java asks you to put quotation marks around it. Now, what I've done here is I've told the program, okay, I'm going to name my string Bob, just a random name that I picked. That's my handle, which allows me to use this string and refer to this data later on in my program. I had to tell the program that it was going to be that Bob was going to be of type string, so that my program would set aside the right amount of data, or the right amount of memory for me to put my data. And then here I say, okay, I'm making a new string, and this is the value that I want to store inside of it. So I've set up my data type, and I've stored it, and I've stored some data there. Now here I'm manipulating my data. I have Bob dot concat Bob, and what this is going to do is concatenate Bob with Bob again, and so afterwards my data no longer reads hello team 613 exclamation point. It reads hello team 613 exclamation point, hello team 613 explanation point, because concatenate means you take the value that's stored in Bob, and then immediately after it you stick on whatever I put in here, and the value that was stored in here, the data, was hello team 613, and so now I have one after the other. This is it's called concatenation. So if we notice, the way I manipulated my data here was a little different than the way I manipulated the data here. Here I used our plus sign, easy enough to understand. This format for manipulating data is what you're going to encounter quite a bit in Java. It's called a method, and if you want to manipulate the data stored in Bob, you're going to write the handle of the information you're going to use. You're going to put a period, and then you're going to put your method name, and then inside of parentheses you're going to give some argument, if it's required, that the method name will use to manipulate this data. Alright, so that's our second example of data being stored and being manipulated. our third example is actually using some code that's very important to our robot. It comes from the WPI library. We'll talk a little bit more about this later. But here I'm setting up I'm setting aside some memory to store a compressor data type. I'm giving it the name C, or the handle C. I'm creating a new compressor data type, and I'm storing inside of it two pieces of information, two numbers, 2 and 2. Now, why this is important? Well, it turns out that if you get into how a compressor works on our robot, the robot needs to know what control input and output is used for turning it on and off, and for reading the amount of pressure in the compressor. And so these are two bits of data that you need to have stored inside of your data system, your data structure right here. So I've set up my new data structure for our compressor, and then I'm manipulating it. I'm saying c.start using this method. If you notice, c.method name parentheses, I need the parentheses even though there's no data that I'm going to use to manipulate C, but it is going to start this data right here. So if you notice, the structure of these two data manipulation statements is similar, because I have my variable that I'm working with, a period, and then the method that I'm working with, and then my parentheses, and then any extra information the method needs to do whatever it's going to do. Okay, now let's say, for example, you are writing some code and you're not entirely certain what a command does or a method does. What you can do is you can click on it, right click, and then click on Show Javadoc, which is basically documentation that tells you what this does. If you click on that, it's going to open up a page that will give you some extra information about what's going on. So here it tells us that when we make our new data type, we have to, and we use this compressor, it's called a constructor, but this compressor command, we have to give two arguments in our parentheses, one that tells us the pressure switch and one that tells us the relay channel. So that's why we had to put the 2 and 2 inside of it. Now if we look here, let's say we wanted more information about this method for manipulating our compressor, the start method. Well, it's listed right here. There's a hyperlink, so if I click on it, it's going to take me to some detailed information about what that start method does. Okay, so actually I set this up wrong. If I click on compressor, all right, and then it gives me some detailed information about the compressor and what information it needs and exactly what the compressor statement does. Okay, so this is a really convenient way to get more information about some of these important data structures or data types, compressors, joysticks, motor controllers, and some of the methods that are associated with each of those data types that we're going to be using in our program this year. Now, all of these data types and methods, they were all written at Worcester Polytechnical Institute, which is up in Massachusetts. So it's called WPI for Worcester Polytechnical Institute, lib for the library that they wrote. And this is something that every year we download the most up-to-date version of this library, so it includes all the code that we need, and it also includes all the documentation that we need to write it. Okay, now if you notice, if you were to scroll up and look on our program, whoops, at the very beginning there's a list of all these import statements. So basically what this is doing is it's import. Right here we have import this compressor, which is statement, which is basically a class that defines what needs to be stored in type of our compressor data type. So it defines that compressor needs us to specify the relay switch and the pressure switch number. It also, this compressor class, in addition to defining what needs to go inside of our compressor objects, or data types, also defines all the different methods and ways we can manipulate that data type. So it's got a start function, it's got a stop function, it's got a get relay value function. It's got all that information there. The set of the constructor definitions, so what needs to go in our data type, and then all the different methods that go along with that data type. All of that together is called a class. And a class is a big idea in Java and many other programming languages. In fact, if you look closely at what we're programming when we do this, we're actually programming a class and we're defining different methods for our class and also the variables that go inside of it. So this is something that you would get into if you were to take a intro to Java programming course. So last bit, let's just review what we did. I told you that a piece of software fundamentally is just a set of instructions for creating data in memory and manipulating the data in memory. And we looked at how we can do that in the specific programming language Java. I showed you an example of data stored in an integer data type, in a string data type, and in a compressor data type. This is something specific for our robot. This compressor data type, another word for that is an object. We saw that you could name those objects using something called a handle. Then we saw that you can manipulate the data in your program using either plus or minus signs in the case of the integer, or using methods like the concatenate or the start method for the string and compressor data types respectively. We said that a class was a set of instructions that define all the data that needs to be stored in a data type, which is called an object in this case, and it also defines all of the methods that are associated with that data type. So in the case of the string, it gives you the concat. In the case of compressor, it gives you start. And then the WPILib is a whole library with a whole bunch of different classes that are useful for our robot. There's a class for compressor, there's a class for joysticks, there's a class for motor controller, there's a class for sensor input, there's a class for sensor output, all sorts of things. And I showed you how you can get more information about what is about all the bits of those classes, what's needed to construct an object from that class or a data type from that class, and then also what all the different available methods are and what those methods do to that data type from that class. Okay, so thank you very much, and I hope to have some links up in Edmodo that might give you a chance to do some more programming tutorials on other websites.